welcoming Dr. Ellen Stockstill.
So thank you for having me. Like I said earlier, I'm sorry, of course, to not be there with you in person, but I always feel like your church is another home for me and my kids too. I always tumble along with me whenever I visit over in Camp Hill. So good morning. I'm happy to be here with you to talk a little bit about Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and how perhaps it intersects with the church and our lives within it. This morning in particular, I was thinking about how we are living in such odd times. There's this pandemic sweeping over the world. Many of us are isolated from family, from colleagues, from friends. For those of us who are working from home during this crisis, we're confined to this odd thing called Zoom for hours every day. And on top of that, we're in an election cycle that's particularly fraught and rather toxic, and in which sometimes it feels like it's easier to find enemies than allies. And so I'm curious as we start, how you are finding solace these days in the midst of all of that. And if we could go around and kind of answer these two questions for me. First, I'd just be curious to know if you're familiar at all with The Handmaid's Tale. It's certainly not a requirement for participation today, but if you've read it or if you have seen imagery from it or have heard things about it before, or have you seen the television adaptation that's been out in the last couple of years? And then secondly, that question I just asked about how or in what are you finding solace these days? Are you reading books? Are you watching shows? Are you watching sports? Are you getting outside and enjoying this fall weather? What are the things that are helping you kind of get along right now? So I'm just going to go kind of in order of who's on my screen. And David, you're first.
Okay. Yeah, I think the show, I think I read the book a million years ago now. And I haven't seen the show. I always feel like I should, and I feel kind of
Handmaid's Tale. Oh, I never read it.
I feel this kind of just to your point, we're living in odd enough times kind of thing that I can't seem to get myself to watch it.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious about it, and so yeah. So the solace, our solace, that's something I haven't thought about a lot. And I know the advice like seek beauty and nature and this kind of thing. Probably as much as anything, I think kind of routine is my go-to. Kind of an exercise routine and a work routine and just to kind of the markers of the week kind of help me keep track that a sense of time is moving forward. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Yeah, and you can have control over your own personal routine, right? In ways that there are all these other things that we don't have control over.
I think that's right. I mean, I think work is very helpful for me in that way. Even if I can, get too much of it, or it can drive me crazy. I think the inputs I have there are very helpful. Yeah. So thanks.
All right, Jean, you're next on my screen, and you're muted right now. So let's.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have not read The Handmaid's Tale. I started it once and I thought, if this is not for me, I have better things to do with my time.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think it's still on my Kindle, but I have homework to do for Dave's book club, so I don't have time to read it.
Yeah. So can you tell me what gave you that reaction of, oh, I don't have time for this right now? What was it about it?
Didn't it start off with a woman delivering a baby?
There is, early in the book, there is a.
Yeah, I got that far and I thought, I really don't want to read this book. And I have the luxury of saying, I don't have to read anything. So
Right.
this is one I'm not going to read.
Right.
And I moved on.
Right.
So what am I doing to find solace? I've led a sort of quiet, solitary life in one sense. I've been widowed for 25 years. I've been retired for 15. So I'm used to this pace of not really having anything to do if I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, I get all involved in these church things, and I'm getting back into playing bridge online and occasionally with friends.
Nice.
And I just hang out. I play with my cat and I talk to my kids on the phone, and I think about what I'm going to do when I retire that I haven't done yet, which is a lot of things. Didn't learn to knit, didn't start painting again, none of those things. And maybe I'll do it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. There's always that. There's always the next day. Yeah, what your comment about the scene, the childbirth scene, I had that happen when there's that PBS show called The Midwife, which many people love.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of folks have recommended it to me, but when it first came out, I was pregnant with my first child.
Ooh, ooh.
And in the first episode of that show, a woman dies in childbirth. And I just was like, I can't watch this. This is too, I can't do it right now. So I've kind of similarly, I'm like, I'll go back and watch that again some other time when it's not so close to home. But yeah, we can have those just kind of visceral reactions to things.
Yeah.
And come back from that. Bob, you're next on my screen.
Yes, we haven't read The Handmaid's Tale. I'm involved in state veterans issues with the legislature. So that's been kind of a constant to keep things going, and walking the church to make sure everything's all right every day.
Yeah. So those are
Joanne
the things
means
that
a
are helping
lot.
you through this time?
Pardon?
So that's what's helping you through this time, is the consistency of that work?
Yes, I'm the committee chairman, so I have to call and schedule appointments with legislators and coordinate things, so it keeps me busy. And Joanne keeps going through books.
Good. All right, Joe, you're next on my screen.
Hi there.
Hi.
So Tracy and I are both listening in. I don't think either of us has read it, right? Not read, but we did watch the series early on, and I kind of can relate to comments made earlier that it just got it's weird to begin with, and it got even weirder, and we were like, yeah, we're done. So we had watched maybe the first whole season and maybe into the second season, and it just got even weirder. And apparently, I guess if you're a big fan of the book, etc., that it got it went way beyond the book.
Right.
But after the first season, and so to that extent, I don't know where the literature ends and Hollywood begins.
Sure.
So
Right. Good. And
But,
what are you finding solace in these days, you and Tracy?
what brings us solace?
Yes.
Probably walks in our park spaces. Like yesterday, we walked the rail trail, or we'll walk on the the down to the river where we live, and also what's that trail that you do with Judy?
The green belt.
The green belt, and those kinds of things bring us together in ways that, with friends, and can walk in public spaces outside, and that feels almost normal.
Yeah. And being outside and seeing things blooming and changing, it's like the natural world goes on, and is
it doesn't know we have a global health crisis.
Right. And there's
the humans know.
Right.
And that's the other thing brings me some solace. It's like our dog doesn't know. She
Mhm.
just thinks this is the greatest time ever because we're home and we can let her out, let her in, let her out, let her in, do whatever she wants.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you.
You're
Nancy,
welcome.
are you there? Maybe not. That's okay. Well, thank you for answering those questions. That gives me a good sense of kind of your level of familiarity with The Handmaid's Tale, as well as how you're coping during this time. And I want to kind of come back to this issue of where we turn for comfort, and sometimes literature's place in that or not. So I want to introduce you to the creator here. This is Margaret Atwood. She was born in 1939. She was born in Ottawa. She's Canadian. She still lives in Canada. She's probably the most famous writer from Canada in the 20th century, really. While she's best known for The Handmaid's Tale, she has just published prolifically throughout her career. She's published over 50 books, which is really astonishing to me. It's one, I just finished writing a book and it was so hard to do that I like to think of her having done so much in her lifetime is really incredible. So probably best known as a novelist, but she's published short fiction, she's published poetry, she's published graphic novels, like long or comic books, children's books. So a lot of material, and her interests are fairly varied and wide. This, of course, is not 50 books, but this just gives you a sense of some of the range and some of her bigger titles. These are all novels that she's published, but like I said, she's published poetry as well and some other things. So you see here the last cover on your screen, that's The Handmaid's Tale. It was published in 1985 in Canada, and then was published in the US a year later in 86. It became fairly popular. It wasn't like a #1 bestseller, but it gained some traction and attention, and then continued to be, it's been continuously in print since then. So when we talk about the success of a book, that's a sure sign. And definitely because of its subject matter, was really well regarded by feminists and also people just interested in kind of future worlds. Sometimes we call speculative fiction. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But so it came out, in 86 here in the States, and has kind of always been there. But obviously, Margaret Atwood's gone on to do many other things in her career. But really in 2017, there was another kind of resurgence in popularity of this book. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is the Women's March, which happened in 2017, which in a lot of ways was in response to the previous presidential election, Donald Trump's comments about women, and then his inauguration. And so this is the largest public demonstration in United States history, the Women's March in 2017. And so lots of women were showing up kind of in solidarity. Some of them were also wearing kind of provocative outfits and things like that, these hats and different stuff to try and raise attention to women's issues in this country. And so that kind of fervor brought about a reinterest in Atwood's book, as well as this TV adaptation of her show that Joe and Tracy were saying that they watched a season of. It airs on Hulu. The first season, as Joe was mentioning, is pretty close to the book. There's some changes in it for TV, but it's a fairly close adaptation of the novel. From there, though, this is the odd thing about adapting a novel to a TV series. Well, the show became very successful. It won the Emmy that year for Best Drama Series. But of course, then they're going to keep making more. And so, as Joe was suggesting, it's gone off from where Atwood, didn't write a storyline for the main character of that book beyond this book, at least at that point when it started. Since then, she has written a kind of another book called The Testaments. that picks up. It's still taking place in the same setting, which is called Gilead. And this is narrated by 3 different characters. So we don't see Offred again, who's the main character in the Handmaid's Tale, but this is like her second book that's in that same world. So all this to say, was published in the 80s, but then there has been this resurgence of interest in it, both because of the show and then because of kind of our current political environment. To kind of give you a nice like summary of the book and also some things that we can pick up on in conversation, I'd like to share this video. And as we start, I hope you'll let me know if the sound goes through. If it doesn't work, I'll switch to a different screen and to make sure we have our sound working. Good on sound?
In Margaret Atwood's near-future novel, The Handmaid's Tale, a Christian fundamentalist regime called the Republic of Gilead has staged a military coup and established a theocratic government in the United States. The regime theoretically restricts everyone, but in practice, a few men have structured Gilead so they have all the power, especially over women. The Handmaid's Tale is what Atwood calls speculative fiction, meaning it theorizes about possible futures. This is a fundamental characteristic shared by both utopian and dystopian texts. The possible futures in Atwood's novels are usually negative or dystopian, where the actions of a small group have destroyed society as we know it. Utopian and dystopian writing tends to parallel political trends. Utopian writing frequently depicts an idealized society that the author puts forth as a blueprint to strive toward. Dystopias, on the other hand, are not necessarily predictions of apocalyptic futures, but rather warnings about the ways in which societies can set themselves on the path to destruction. The Handmaid's Tale was published in 1985, when many conservative groups attacked the gains made by the second wave feminist movement. This movement had been advocating greater social and legal equality for women since the early 1960s. The Handmaid's Tale imagines a future in which the conservative counter-movement gains the upper hand and not only demolishes the progress women had made toward equality, but makes women completely subservient to men. Gilead divides women in the regime into distinct social classes based upon their function as status symbols for men. Even their clothing is color-coded. Women are no longer allowed to read or move about freely in public, and fertile women are subject to state-engineered rape in order to give birth to children for the regime. Although The Handmaid's Tale is set in the future, one of Atwood's self-imposed rules in writing it was that she wouldn't use any event or practice that hadn't already happened in human history. The book is set in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a city that during the American colonial period had been ruled by the theocratic Puritans. In many ways, the Republic of Gilead resembles the strict rules that were present in Puritan society: rigid moral codes, modest clothing, banishment of dissenters, and regulation of every aspect of people's lives and relationships. For Atwood, the parallels to Massachusetts Puritans were personal as well as theoretical. She spent several years studying the Puritans at Harvard, and she's possibly descended from Mary Webster, a Puritan woman accused of witchcraft who survived her hanging. Atwood is a master storyteller. The details of Gilead, which we've only skimmed the surface of, slowly come into focus through the eyes of its characters, mainly the novel's protagonist, Offred, a handmaid in the household of a commander. Before the coup that established Gilead, Offred had a husband, a child, a job, and a normal middle-class American life. But when the fundamentalist regime comes into power, Offred is denied her identity, separated from her family, and reduced to being, in Offred's words, a two-legged womb for increasing Gilead's waning population. She initially accepts the loss of her fundamental human rights in the name of stabilizing the new government. But state control soon extends into attempts to control the language, behavior, and thoughts of herself and other individuals. Early on, Offred says, "I wait. I compose myself. My self is a thing I must compose as one composes a speech. She likens language to the formulation of identity. Her words also acknowledge the possibility of resistance. And its resistance, the actions of people who dare to break the political, intellectual, and sexual rules that drives the plot of The Handmaid's Tale. Ultimately, the novel's exploration of the consequences of complacency and how power can be wielded unfairly makes Atwood's chilling vision of a dystopian regime ever relevant. You can download an audio version of this book or any other book on the TED-Ed.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask, thinking about this book and this genre of dystopian literature, dystopian movies, shows, all kinds of stuff, they're quite popular. And so I'm curious why you think that dystopian stories are compelling. I wonder for us as a church and as a people of faith, you know, in that video, I talked about utopian futures and dystopian. And so you have in a utopian future, it's you know, all green grass and good stuff. It is the ideal. That's hopefully what we are progressing toward. And then the dystopian is the kind of dark underbelly of that, the other side of the coin, if you will. So for us as Christians, which I always think of us as like a hope-filled people, we have faith in redemption and grace upon grace. And so I'm curious, for people of faith, what role does any kind of dystopian material have for us? Is it the kind of thing that we should even explore? Or is it outside of our values or things that we hold most dear because we are a people who look to the future, who look to hope, who look to God for redemption and grace? Like what role, if any, does something like this that's quite dark have in that? One of the values of dystopian books or shows or movies is that maybe there's some warning signs there for us, right? Or things that we may notice. And Atwood's story in particular shows us human beings have done things to each other like this before. And I think Atwood pushes us to wrestle with the idea that we could do these kinds of things to each other again. Right? It's not out of the question. One of the things that spurred her to write this book was this, you know, she was working on it in the 80s and the Berlin Wall was still up. In fact, she was living in Berlin for some time when she began working on this. And she was disturbed by this attitude in the United States and in Canada too, where she's from, of like, well, that kind of thing could never happen here, right? We would never be like the Nazis were, or we would never be like Stalin. We would never do those kinds of things. That's what people over there do, not what we do. And so she wanted to kind of turn the mirror, if you will, not just on Americans, this takes place in the US, this book, but just to say, like, let's really think about what human beings have done to each other before. And it's not reserved to just a certain group of people way over there. So one of the elements of this book that we've already mentioned is that the government system that Atwood creates that is so controlling is based on certain passages from the Bible and certain ideas that kind of come out of this fundamentalist group, the Galatians, and this is what they base their society on. I hesitate to call it Christian because I don't think it is. And there's very little talk in the book of Jesus Christ as a person. And in fact, that you learn that different kind of religious groups have been kind of squashed or silenced. And so very similar to what we saw in the video, like the Quakers, kind of the Puritans shutting them out and things like that. But nonetheless, I think in popular culture, and Dave was mentioning this a little bit earlier, the book and the show are very much associated with kind of Christian power run amok. And for us as Christians and as a faith community, does that trouble you? That's kind of one question. And secondly, do we need to be kind of concerned about the reputation of the church, if you will, kind of within popular culture? If one of the kind of big shows and recognizable, you'll see on the screen here, this outfit, right? This kind of imagery of resistance to state control also suggestively maybe pushes back against church, right? And so it's cloaking things in all kinds of religious language, but ultimately does not have a faithful kind of core to it, right? That it is about power and preserving power for certain people. And so you saw in the video, the way that people are kind of coded in the way that they dress, these certain outfits and colors, and divided into classes. And it's all, again, it's a system of control. They may have labels that sound religious, like they are the Marthas, that those are named for Martha in the New Testament, right? That she's supposed to just like serve. And so that's what the Marthas in this world, they do all the like cooking and cleaning, they work in these houses. The handmaids, it's also a reference to something in the Old Testament. And they use some passages from the Old Testament as part of a ritual that's portrayed in the book. You have these angels that they're described. There are stores that are called, I wrote them down. Oh, this loaves and fishes, milk and honey. So it's using biblical language, but again, it's not ever about kind of faith in God. It's more about controlling people, their movements, what they can do, and so on. So yeah, co-opting language, if family values is a good one, like taking that and then creating kind of something that is new. All right, well, I will see you all next week. I'm looking forward to it.